Hey Atlanta, say hello to small business help from Apple. That's right, we're here to make starting and running your business simpler. From helping you choose the right devices to setting them up hassle-free, we can help you build your business in no time. Speak to a business expert and get the help you need at no cost whatsoever. At Apple, we're open for your small business. Go to apple.com/small business or visit an Apple store to learn more.
Now, I've been looking forward for this because, as I mentioned, so my radio show is growing, and I picked up Sacramento and picked up Stanton, Virginia. We just picked up Oklahoma City, I think 2 weeks ago, and I moved from being like midnight to 2 a.m. to 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. live in Tulsa, Oklahoma on KRMG a couple weeks ago. So one of the selfish reasons I wanted to have Congressman Hearn here is this district, but I also wanted to have the governor of the state of Oklahoma here as well. One, because we keep having all these teams that just keep getting added to the SEC that aren't actually in the Southeast. And I gotta question this. It's just very, very odd. Like pretty soon we're gonna have like Oregon in the SEC and we'll have to change our name to something else. But also I've like got this new appreciation for Oklahoma now that I keep winding up all these radio stations out there and have a large audience. And we've got people from Oklahoma here in the room, and it's like, might as well have folks from Oklahoma come, including the governor of the state of Oklahoma, who is a businessman, a popular governor, just got reelected, went through this wild reelection campaign where the Democrats, for some reason, got it in their head like, it's like Kansas, we can get a Democrat in Oklahoma. No, you can't get a Democrat in Oklahoma. But also, one of the fascinating things to me is I actually am a Neil Gorsuch fan, but also Neil Gorsuch seems to have this bone to pick with Oklahoma on the rights of the tribal rights and things. And so I've been looking forward to having this conversation with the governor of the fantastic state of Oklahoma, Kevin Stitt. I'm so glad you could come. Thank you so much. Absolutely. So I gotta, well, first of all, I debated whether or not I'm gonna ask you this question. I'm gonna ask you this question. In your opinion, why should people go to Oklahoma instead of Texas? Because I know there's this rivalry there.
Well, first off, thanks so much for having me. Well, first, Oklahoma is a step above Texas, okay? It's just clear. But no, we've got a great rivalry with Oklahoma, or with Texas, and we certainly beat them in football, so.
There you go, yes. And then weirdly, everybody comes to the SEC. It's an odd thing to me. So let me ask you this out of the gate, because I actually went back. I rarely like sit down and do deep dive research and things on before I do interviews like this, but I wanted to go back and read Neil Gorsuch's decision on tribal rights in Oklahoma. And it seems like your state, as opposed to the other 49, does have this situation now where you are a sovereign state within the American federal system, but also a sovereign state separate from the United States with Indian treaties. And how do you as the governor now navigate the tribal relations?
Well, thanks for asking about that. And this is something I think that the audience, you guys it's just a fascinating situation that we find ourselves in. I tell people this is the biggest issue that's ever hit a state since maybe the Civil War. And I think after I explain it to you, you'll see why we're struggling with it so hard. Well, first off, I'm a Cherokee Indian, okay? I have my tribal card. Most Indians in Oklahoma, this is what people don't realize, they look like me. They look like my 6 kids. So all this money that's pouring in to quote unquote indigenous people is just silly. It's dumb. We don't need to do that anymore. And so I want to explain the difference between Oklahoma and a true reservation, okay? So the Navajo reservation is a true reservation. That's out in Arizona, and I've talked to Ducey, I've talked to their governor. Okay, so the Navajo reservation is land held in reserve for the tribes. All of it is common land, okay? And so yes, it's true that an Indian that lives on that reservation doesn't pay taxes to the state of Arizona. 100% true. But what's also true is the state of Arizona doesn't build roads or bridges or schools or hospitals on that reservation land. It's truly land set aside in reserve for that tribe. Okay, now back to Oklahoma. We became a state in 1907. And at statehood, we used to have reservations, but we disbanded those at statehood. We allotted out all of our land, 160 acres at a time. They did away with their court system. We became one state until 2020. And Gorsuch ruled in this McGirt situation, which McGirt is a bad guy. He was prosecuted by the state of Oklahoma. He raped a 4-year-old, was sentenced to prison. And then his defense attorneys came up with this idea that he shouldn't have been tried because he was an Indian on an Indian reservation. So Gorsuch said that now 42% of our state was at a reservation. So that means Tulsa, Oklahoma, with 1 million people, is a reservation. So what are the consequences? Well, now they're saying that they don't have to pay taxes to the state of Oklahoma. All right? So think about this. Kevin Stitt, a doctor, a lawyer, whatever, a businessman in Tulsa, Oklahoma, doesn't pay taxes to the state, but a single mom of another race has to. And our kids all go to the same high school. We drive on the same roads. We have the same benefits. They're arguing that the Tulsa Police Department doesn't have the authority to issue an Indian speeding tickets, speeding through Tulsa. I mean, it's just preposterous. It's created two systems of justice that I'm fighting just everywhere I turn around, and most people don't realize the consequences on the ground to our district attorneys, our prosecutors. They've lost the ability to protect and prosecute crimes when an Indian is involved in the crime. And so that's why I say it's such a huge issue that we have to deal with. And unfortunately, Congress has not had the appetite to do the magic words that Gorsuch mentioned in that deal, that the McGirt decision that said that they need to disestablish the reservations in the state of Oklahoma. So that's basically a quick overview of what's happened in the state.
Honestly, I'm a fan of the justice, and I understand his reasoning. He was disagree with it, but it's kind of just, you've probably got the most complicated gubernatorial position in the whole country having to navigate it.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a Strobel case right now before the Supreme Court on taxes. Do they pay taxes? And remember, I say we're all Oklahomans. This is we all go to the same public schools. And so to say us versus them, it's never been that way in the state of Oklahoma. So hopefully we get this settled. And I think most Oklahomans agree with me that we need to have one set of rules regardless of your race. We can't have a situation where there's certain punishment for this crime, for this race, and then Indians have a different punishment. And again, when I say Indians, I say that in the fact that people need to understand. Remember, Indians are me, my 6 kids with blonde hair and blue eyes. That's the way Native Americans are in the state of Oklahoma.
Now, when I was growing up as a kid, my dad worked for Conoco Oil, and I grew up understanding that there was the state called Oklahoma with this place called Ponca City, and that oil came out of the ground, much like Texas, but it was different. Energy is this massive issue for your state, and I got to imagine that, like, you feel at war with the federal government right now constantly because of their energy regulations.
Yeah, I mean, well, first off, I think most Americans, they understand that we have to have an affordable, reliable energy grid. I think it's a national security issue. I think energy independence is so important for not only the United States, but also our allies around the world. And Oklahoma's story is amazing. I mean, we're number 6 in oil production, number 5 in natural gas production. But what people don't realize, we're also number 3 in electricity generated by wind. Okay, we have some of the cleanest water, cleanest air in the country. We're one of only 4 states that over 45% of our energy comes from renewables. So we have this all-of-the-above approach, and we just think it's unbelievable that the Biden-Harris administration is trying to tell us that you can't have this gas stove or you can't do LNG exports, which, by the way, hurts our European allies, it hurts Japan, it hurts all of our allies because they have to have reliable energy in their countries, and it just forces them to, our adversaries, really, quite frankly. And so we don't understand the war on just American companies and American energy and all of the above approach is kind of the way we say it in the state of Oklahoma.
Yeah. How is the border crisis and just this wave of illegal immigrants, how is it affecting Oklahoma?
You know, I mean, you've heard it said before that every state is a border state, and it's so true that what happens on the border in Texas, the drug trade, it's coming into Oklahoma. I mean, fentanyl deaths are up about 500% in the state since I took over as governor. But the Republican governors have been pushing back. We've been standing with Governor Abbott. We've sent letters to President Biden. We've all sent troops down to the southern border. And it's unbelievable to us how you can have an administration that refuses to have a strong border, right? It just doesn't make sense. Unless you think that you can turn those into voters and it's going to help you in your next election. That's the only possible rational explanation that the Democrats have in this situation. But I've been down there, and one policy change, which would cost the American people nothing, and I've talked to the people on the border security, and they tell me it's simply the Trump policy of remain in Mexico, okay? That's all it is. We're going to make sure you stay in Mexico until your court date. And Biden canceled that day one in office. And so now they get a sheet of paper that says, come back in a couple years, come on in and enjoy all the services of the state of Oklahoma, or the citizens of the United States of America. And how stupid are we that we have all of these services, whether it's healthcare or housing, that's the benefit of the U.S. citizens, and it's a safety net for the less fortunate. We can't afford to do that and have open borders and have all these people coming in taking advantage of the taxpayers in the U.S.
Now, under the Democrats' logic, as I'm learning, sitting here talking to you, they can come to Oklahoma, identify as Native American, and I mean, they don't even have to pay taxes or do anything. It's remarkable, just identify as it. In addition to energy and border issues in Oklahoma, we have a mutual friend, and I know your pollster, and we were laughing before your last reelection that it kind of sailed under the national radar, but there were so many stories of just the Democrats had you, and you were going to be beaten, and there were Democratic polls that the media ran with, and it was just kind of the epitome of how the national media, like they do with Texas every year, that, oh my gosh, it's suddenly the state is going to flip. When we had Congressman Hearn here earlier, he mentioned that you can't find a Democrat in the state of Oklahoma, and yet there's always seems to be this massive news story about these states. And so I wanted to talk to you more about national politics, but as it applies to Oklahoma, just your experience in your race with you being a Republican governor in a state that it's not a swing state, and yet the national media wanted to savage you as a governor with a great record just because some Democratic polling firm could produce a crank poll and say, oh, we can get this guy.
I mean, you said it very well. I mean, nobody's believing these polls anymore. It's who's paying for them, what agenda are they trying to push? And so, yeah, they were showing a really tight race. I ended up winning by more than I did the first time, so won by 15 points. But it's really disappointing that our news media is kind of tries to push that narrative, and it's frustrating not only for Oklahomans, but I think Americans in general.
Now, on those issues, I mean, all politics is local. We can talk about the border, we can talk about the economy, we can talk about energy, but every day in Oklahoma, in addition to the tribal situation you're dealing with, what really is, if you wanted Americans to know, here really are the local issues for Oklahoma that you as governor have to deal with that may be unique to your state. What else do you have to deal with?
Well, as a businessman, I'd never been in office until I ran in 2018. I'd started a company with $1,000 in a computer and grown it, and had over 1,000 employees, and then just felt called to. I think Trump inspired me a little bit, and I just felt called to go serve my state. And I tell people, I think that's what our founding fathers envisioned, is that you would be a successful teacher or rancher or business person, and you'd leave that to go serve your state or your country, and then you go back to the private sector. And when you do that, you literally can focus on the next generation and not the next election. Too many times, politicians are always focused on, stepping up the ladder, or what's the next thing for me, or how. And I just think that's the wrong approach to take. And so I promised Oklahomans I was going to run Oklahoma like a business. And so that's been my approach. Oklahoma is the most business-friendly state in the country right now. I took over and we had no money in savings. We were having billion-dollar budget deficits. We were having teacher walkouts. And today, we've put more money in education than any other governor in my first 5 years than they did for 25 years before I got here. We're running an efficient government. I've cut taxes, I've cut income, I've cut the corporate, I've cut the individual, I've cut grocery tax, which was the most regressive tax that we had, because government is not the answer, okay? I've been on the inside, and more government is not the answer. I love how Ronald Reagan said it. Most of the time, government is the problem. And that's why I believe in limited government. And so those are one of the big things we're doing. The other thing is when I talk to businesses, and I have an international strategy where I'm recruiting, I've met with probably 60 ambassadors, recruiting companies to come to Oklahoma. They love our energy. They love our affordable energy. We're leading the country in that. But more than anything, it's all about workforce. And so I want to touch real quick on education as well, because I think at the end of the day, whether you're Republican or Democrat, when we get elected to these positions like governor, I tell people that, we really all want the same thing. We want the best education for our kids. We want the best infrastructure. We want the best, roads and bridges, infrastructure, healthcare, and then the best economy. And so those are the things I always focus on. And when I think about education, this is something that I think most people would agree with me is, during COVID, it really exposed what was happening in education. And if any of you were governors and you had to talk to the single moms and single dads during that time period, and most of our schools were open, but we had a couple inner city schools that were closed. And I hammered them every day to open because the people would call me and they would say, Governor, what am I supposed to do? My first grader is not learning how to read on Zoom right now, and I have to go to work during the day. And it just would break your heart. And so we passed the best school choice plan, I think, in the country. Texas now is looking at our plan, trying to get it across the finish line. And I always tell people this, rich people already have school choice. They can put their kids in any school they want. And so we passed a refundable tax credit that every family now in Oklahoma has up to $7,500 to take their kid to any school that they want to. And I just think that's going to be a game changer.
Yes. Now, you mentioned the economy. It's a very dangerous thing for a governor to come to Georgia and try to claim to be like the best state for business. Because, have you seen the Kemp shotgun ads? This can be a dangerous man with these competitions.
Hey, I just talked to somebody that moved from Georgia to Oklahoma, and their taxes went down. So I'm just telling you, okay?
Yep, these are fighting words around here. You settle it on the football field. How do you actually balance your relationships with other, because I know you've got the National Gubernatorial Association, but as these institutions go, I always seem like the bipartisan ones actually drift to the left, but you've also got the RGA. How do you balance your relationships with the other governors?
It's very collegial, and we get along and share ideas with each other. Like when the border crisis, it's really, I feel like Congress is so dysfunctional that really the ideas are coming from the governors. And so we've come together on the LNG pause to send letters to President Biden to say, this is just unbelievable. How in the world can you harm our domestic companies and also hurt our allies that rely on our natural gas here in America? And we need you to reverse that. We stood with Abbott on border policies, and we got this national conversation going on. So school choice, we're helping our friends, and Kim Reynolds in Iowa got school choice done, and Ducey in Arizona was kind of a guy that I looked up to. Jeb Bush in Florida 20 years ago has been coaching me on some of the things they did in education. So it's really a time that we can learn from each other. And the United States of America, we have 50 different laboratories of democracy. And as a business guy, I have my staff, we put together, my metrics, and I track everything. And I have a realistic look, where's Oklahoma compared to every other state? And then where do we need to be 25th? And where do we need to be to top 10? And I'll tell you one thing that when I took over, we were last place in incarceration rate. So in other words, we incarcerated more men and women than any other state. And I was like, well, this is stupid. Our people aren't worse than any other state. So I started looking at the policies and realized that we need to change some things. And now I've closed 4 prisons, 2 private prisons. I've saved hundreds of millions of dollars to the taxpayer. And we're number 2 in the lowest recidivism rate right now in the country. And so we're doing some things because I just try to look at those stats. And if Texas is doing something better than me, or Arizona, or California, well, California's not doing anything better than us. But actually, The state, we're top 10 in people moving to Oklahoma right now. Per capita, not per capita, but true numbers, we're top 10 right now. And the state we get most people from is California, if you can believe that. And I'll meet these people from California, and they'll come up to me and at events, and Governor, can we get a picture? We just moved from California. I'm like, absolutely, but here's the deal. I had to wait 18 years to vote in the state of Oklahoma. I'm going to make you wait 18 years before you vote in the state of Oklahoma.
So, the reason I like having these conversations like this is inevitably you say something that then triggers something in my brain that if I had pre-scripted, I must ask these 5 questions I wouldn't get to. The recidivism rate in prisons, how much of that is mental health and what you deal with as a governor being mental health issues in your state population?
You know, there is definitely a portion of that is mental health, but some of the other things that I found is, you know, I ended up doing the largest commutation in U.S. history when I first came into office, so November of 2019. And I realized most politicians wait till the end of their term. I didn't realize I was supposed to do that because it's complicated. We'd passed some law that the people that I let out wouldn't be if they committed that drug crime today. It was very small, minor drug crimes that we let those folks out. But I realized they didn't have a driver's license when they get out. They didn't know how to get an education or a job. And so we passed the Sarah Stitt Act, which was my wife's idea, which, gentlemen, you get a lot of kudos from your wife when you pass a bill and you name it after your wife. That's great. But basically, some of those things we saw were just kind of stacked up on people. People were getting out of prison with $10,000, $20,000 worth of fines, fees, and court costs. And that was super hard for most people to get past, so I tried to reduce that. It wasn't restitution dollars either. It was the way that we were funding our court system. So I changed all those rules. There was a perverse incentive. In other words, our judges were paying for their retirement from fines, fees, and court costs. So I changed that. I was like, well, that's dumb. I go, let's have the legislature appropriate the money to the court system so they're not incentivized to get that money from fines, fees, and court costs. And then also just making sure that people can get jobs right when they get out. Those are kind of the things we're seeing. But we're number 2 in recidivism rate, so we're doing something right because the people aren't going back into prison. Right. And so we're going to keep moving up that ranking, which is normally not a Republican deal you talk about. But as a business guy, I look at all these metrics, and if my state is last place in something, just like in business, we're like, if they can do it, we can do it, right? We're number 5 right now in bridge conditions in the country. I look at hotels sold. I look at per capita income. We look at teacher pay on a metric between other states. You have to play what market is. I love our teachers. I want to make sure that we support them. So that's kind of how I think about stuff. It's more from a business standpoint.
So you mentioned this. You mentioned hotels. I find it I really thought I was reading a fake news story, but it's true that someone wants to build the tallest building in the Western Hemisphere in Oklahoma City. That kind of blew my mind. That what sets Oklahoma City apart that someone would want to build the tallest building in
Oklahoma is where the puck is heading. I mean, this is just, everybody knows this, right? It's unbelievable. The quality of life. There's an arbitrage right now on labor cost, on cost of living. We're like 400% cheaper than they are in California. It's where manufacturing is coming to. My international strategy, when I talk to a European company that wants a U.S. presence, well, Oklahoma is the right spot to be located for distribution purposes, for cost of living, for energy reliability.
And let me interrupt you there, because just thinking on the map, you've got, I think it was Brian Kemp was mentioning earlier that Georgia's 2 days at most from the 48 states. You've got to be like a day in any direction logistically to be able to.
That's right. I mean, we're dead center right there in the middle of the U.S., so we're 1,000 nautical miles from anyone if your pilot's in the room. And then most people don't know this. We also have shipping all the way. The most inland port comes right outside of Tulsa. So we have shipping. All of the fertilizers will come up through the shipping, all to be distributed to Kansas, Oklahoma, Iowa, Nebraska. All the grain has come back through there. The pipeline capital of the world. So Cushing, Oklahoma, is the largest oil commercial reserve in the country. We've got 100 million barrels. Actually, West Texas crude, West Texas Intermediate, WTI, is priced not from West Texas, from Cushing, Oklahoma. when you get a barrel of oil to Cushing, Oklahoma, that's where the price is priced off of. For everybody in this audience, this is something I love explaining to people. There's 2 pipelines from Canada to Cushing, Oklahoma, okay? One of them is called the Keystone. The Keystone XL was going to be the 3rd pipeline. Did you know that? The Keystone XL was going to be the 3rd pipeline from Canada to Cushing, Oklahoma, that gets all political, and then the Biden cancels it and all the stuff that goes on. We know the safest way to move oil and natural gas is by pipeline. But who are the lobbyists that get in and kill it? The trucking companies, maybe BNSF, the railroads, and all the people that think they're going to lose some of their revenue. So it always comes back to money on what's happening on these political issues.
So transitioning from business into statewide office, what's the biggest surprise to you from going from the private sector as a businessman into being the governor of Oklahoma?
Well, first off, as a lot of business people in the audience, and I had to bootstrap everything, and I started with $1,000 in a computer and grew my company. And as CEO, you get your team around you, and you make the right decision for the company, and you move forward. In politics, it's like being in business with the legislature, which is 150 of your craziest uncles, and it's just very, very odd. The other thing I explain to people is, think about this for a second. In business, let's say your business makes $1 million this year, okay? So in 2024, we make $1 million, and we sit around at the end of the year and we're planning for 2025. Nobody in business thinks to themselves, okay, well, how can we raise expenses $1 million, okay? And let's spend that whole $1 million we just made, raise all the base level expenses, so we go into 25 at 0. That's what government does every single year, okay? It's worse than that, because the federal side, they're spending, and I loved your panel before, because they're spending about $2 trillion over our revenue or over our income. Do y'all hear me on that? It's unsustainable on a national level. And so our interest-only cost is now $1 trillion, which is going to be more than we spend on the national debt. It is a cliff that we're facing. And I explain it to people this way. When I bought my first house, after I graduated from college, I spent $66,000, bought my first house at 8th and Harvard, right across from TU in Tulsa. And I remember making my mortgage payment, and my mortgage payment was $550, and only $49 went towards principal. And I was like, oh my gosh, only $49 went towards principal. But at least I knew in 30 years I was going to own my house. Well, we don't pay interest and principal on our national debt. This means we'll never pay it off. It's interest only. And we keep spending $2 trillion more every year that just keeps building up. We're already at 25% of our interest payments. And as soon as the bonds reprice, okay, and the finance guys know this, it's going to be about 45% of our income that we're spending on interest only. So those will start to reprice, and it's just, I think we need to have, and Republicans and Democrats both have to have an honest conversation and nationally about this.
Last question for you, transitioning again from private to public sector, being in the spotlight, how do you balance your family and the public and their transition also into a public light that maybe they didn't expect to have?
Yeah, I mean, it's been, I have 6 children, been married for 26 years, so our kids go from 23 down to 10. And my oldest was a senior in high school when I won. My youngest was 4. And so here was the difference. I tried to get my oldest daughter, I said, you ought to go to college in Oklahoma, look at Oklahoma State or OU. And she was like, Dad, I don't want anybody to know I'm the governor's daughter. I'm going out of state. I said, okay. So she ended up going to Baylor and graduate. She's in law school now. My next son, he was like, you're crazy, Natalie. I'm not going anywhere but OU or OSU. Dad's the governor. So that's the difference between the kids. But we had to move from Tulsa. All they knew was one school, and we were there and established. And I moved to Oklahoma City, and so it was a struggle. I had a couple that were teenagers, and then the younger ones are fine. But there's a couple that struggle with that transition a little bit. But I believe you have to keep your priorities right? You have to put God first. then your family, and then your job. And so I'm a father. I've got an important job to do, and just like all of us, but we can't get our priorities out of whack because I'm a father first, I'm a husband to my wife, and I'm going to be that long after I get through with governor. And I'm just trying to leave my state top 10. I tell people my vision is Oklahoma to be a top 10 state and to be the best state for business. And I believe if we do that, everything else takes care of itself. Our education system, everything. I just set up business courts in Oklahoma, which I'd love to talk about. That's something that I think is really important.
So business courts so very much like Delaware has the chancery system?
Correct. I saw, Delaware is starting to stumble, but most businesses know that most of your Fortune 500 companies are domiciled, or they put their Delaware law, they incorporate in Delaware. Elon just pulled out of Delaware. You saw him starting to get involved with compensation. You saw what happened to President Trump's businesses. Right. They're attacking him in New York. And so I want businesses to know that Oklahoma is the most business-friendly state. So we set up chancery courts or business courts. So if a business is sued, or the headquarters or the board members are sued, you're going to have business judges. I'm getting rid of the corporate income tax. So we're really just trying to be the most business-friendly state in the country.
Well, I plan on coming to see you, and now that I'm on in Tulsa and Oklahoma City, I've got an excuse to come out there because I've only made a pit stop in Oklahoma City to refuel in a plane one time, but now I've got an excuse. I got to come. So I also have heard that I can't get elected in Oklahoma because my name's not Kevin, and you apparently have to be named Kevin to get elected there between you and Kevin Hearn.
Funny.
So thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate you making the trip out here, and I look forward to getting to Oklahoma.
My pleasure. Thank y'all so much.
That was fun. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
It's good. Anytime. Let me know. Come to the Governor's Mansion. Love to have you over.
I will do so.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.